Mr. Brad Holland.
Mhm.
Um,
Awesome.
for those of you who don't know, I'll kind of frame it this way. Um, this was, it's like you could pick most illustrators that worked before him and after them, and he would be at the top of their list of this guy was one of the greatest artists to ever work, greatest illustrators to ever work. He influenced American illustration as with concept more than anybody. My father would say about Brad, he was just simply there was no second. He was the best conceptual illustrator that ever worked, and I truly feel that way myself. Brad was from Fremont, Ohio. He was born in 1943. Um, he's self-taught. He was sending work into Disney and to the Saturday Evening Post when he was 15 through 17 years old. Um, he got his first art job at Hallmark Cards when it said 20 in his bio. He told me he was 19 when he got hired there. So he went to work, he moved to Kansas City and went to work at Hallmark Cards at the ripe old age. We'll use 20. Um, he was there for about 3 years before he stormed New York City and became just an absolute icon in the illustration world. You know his work. Most of you have seen his work someplace. This is very indicative of things he was doing in the mid 70s, mid 80s. But I'm going to show you some early work, some things he did for the op-ed pages of the New York Times that were just unbelievable. Just black and white, pen and ink, um, always, always driven by idea. You could see some of his influence there. Obviously, somebody like Leonard Baskin. He says that, it's interesting. I was reading about him that the German artist Heinrich Clay was very, very important to him as an influence, along with, as he referred to, the great ones, the big three muralists from Mexico, Diego Rivero, Jose Clemente, or is it, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Orozco,
O- Orozco.
Orozco, and I knew you would know that, right? Um, I worry about Ray being in here more than anybody else because he's always correct. Uh, David Alfaro, is it Seguros?
Higueros. Yeah, Higueros.
Seguros.
Yeah.
Okay. And so those are some of his influences. I think he had many, many more. Um, it just his work was so creative, so well done. And I had the good fortune of the last 3 years at the Illustration Academy having him visit. Uh, and I was very surprised in watching him draw and the way he worked. I thought it would be different than what it was. And then it all really made a lot of sense to me after I watched him for a while.
What a juggernaut, right? I mean, it's like you look at a source book of illustration from like the Black Book or something like that from that era from the 90s,
Yeah.
and like half of the
Yeah.
book, and these are gigantic books, people, that I think good friend and mentor John Rush told me one time, we were talking about him and he was like, oh yeah, I got one somewhere, I think it's holding up this shelf. It's like the perfect load bearing book, and like more than half of it was just people knocking off
Brad
Brad
Holland.
Holland. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
dozens of artists.
It's interesting. It was like, well, I'll talk more about that later on. And the artist that really changed that somebody like Gary Kelly or somebody like Bernie Fuchs or my father that had huge influence. So many people imitated what they did, and I don't think anybody imitated anybody any more than they did Brad Holland. You know, he
Well,
brought the,
was he the business guy in the tightrope walk? I mean, that's like he was the guy that kind of did that initially, right?
yeah,
And then
you know,
everybody had to have one in their portfolio.
yeah, and
Uh,
I think that the other thing that well, he created the visual metaphor to be really common, used
right.
in illustration, and and I think he really, just like this piece, you know, something happening to a human figure or somebody being involved in something that's not directly related. It's not to the text in general. It's another way, a less literal way of solving the visual problem. And I think he did that better than anybody. You know, things like this.
Mm.
You know, along with the great problem solving, he was a great image maker too. Great designer, uh, great painter.
Tyson.
That's Tyson.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Then crush.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to capture a likeness of somebody from that angle.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I love that one.
The Ahmadinejad.
I,
Yeah.
I love them all. Look at that.
So many favorites.
Hmm.
I used to just I was always on his website.
Kind of powerful, isn't it? It's funny, the surrealism thing. It's like, I think the other one of his big influences, and I talked to him a little bit about this, but you would have to say any of the, especially Magritte, being able to take that type of problem solving from the surrealists of, you know, early 20th century. I think he had a big influence on him. Who does that remind you of, Ray? If you had to think of another artist, who would be the artist that reminded you?
I would say either Gustav or
My first choice would be Parrish, just because
oh
of the checker, the cloth, what he did, what he got away with doing,
yeah.
you know, the folds with the pattern on the cloth.
Baby and got it.
Look at that.
That's so creepy.
It was just, you know, this is the thing that, you know, obviously relates to Magritte.
So people have to understand, you know, a lot of this is during the era of you had a need. There was a need for like op-ed illustrations or the magazine were covering topics that were a lot more. Um, they were less literal. They were more about like how do you think about debt, or how do you think about
Yeah.
growing your own small business, like just these abstract kind of concepts.
And Ray, very interesting. I had got such a kick out of this, listening to that. I had heard this from him in a lecture years before he came to the Academy, listening to talk at the Society of Illustrators. Um, and he talked about how he managed his career and how he didn't take very much art direction. Most of the pictures that he made, unless it was something very particular for a particular story that had to be, you know, like some of the Shakespeare stuff he did at the end of his life. But um, most of the pictures and the problem solving ideas, he made pictures for himself. And when an art director would call him with an assignment, he said, well, what do you think about this? Will this work for you? And he said more than 90% of his work was purchased that way, where he would
So
just sit around and try to solve these very um, uh, these visuals that would go a lot of different directions and cover a lot of ground that weren't real specific that lots of different clients could use. Like this. I mean,
Mhm.
how many ways could a business use this?
Right. Oh, that's wow.
Right.
It's a lot of layers to. I love that one. That's one of my favorites right there. Yeah.
But I just think it was so interesting, you call Brad and the other really funny thing, he was so popular that when I first got to know him during the 90s, um, he's a freelance artist that had an unpublished phone number.
Wow.
That's saying a lot because there was no internet. Everybody, he worked for who he wanted to work for. He made all his contacts directly, and that was his audience.
But he basically was kind of like a fine artist. He just did mostly personal work.
Yeah,
It solved a problem, but he was solving his own problems.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And then he made it work for illustration.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
I love that, Jordan.
Yeah.
Such a. I love his writings too. I read all of them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
He's
The Education of an Illustrator by Marshall Arisman and Stephen Heller was like my Bible for a while.
Oh,
And
that's so good,
his the one on the right. Oh,
Uh-huh. Yeah, that one. I was gonna say that one never gets old, but that's pretty much this whole slideshow.
right. My favorite Brad Holland quote is like, students expect to be like a fully formed artist after 4 years of school. Like, and he said Rembrandt couldn't do that. What makes you think you can?
yeah.
And he's basically like, keep growing. I love that.
He did a lot of other things too. I mean, he was the first artist to take on the orphan rights. He took on a lot of people don't know this. We all know Icon, right? The illustration conference. It's become very much a part of traditional education. Art schools is what drives it now. But Brad Holland and Chris Payne created Icon. And he did a lot of things for the industry.
Yeah.
He's a very, very bright man. And I've said this a number of times. He's the last person I would want to be in an argument with. He's so very intelligent, and he was just he could be combative. That's
Yeah.
that's a minor way of putting it, but he was a bright guy.
He strikes me as like, I love that one. Somebody who's just really aware of art, of other like of just art history, and like a curious person. Like his artwork
Tapped
strikes
in.
me as that.
He was
Yeah.
locked in.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's just a great painting, right?
Figures
These
were
are
always in
mostly
some weird.
acrylics, right? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say it's interesting. His figures were always in some like fantastical vacuum. Like it was always a very. It's kind of interesting.
I don't expect everybody to read this, but
Yeah.
This is what I was talking about right here. This was my
that's not art, that's illustration. And I love, him pointing out that everybody's an artist. Everybody that's a musician or a filmmaker, singer, songwriter, everybody's an artist. And I'll just read the last line. Um, uh, the only people left who seem not to be artists are illustrators. That's not art. That's illustration. I love it.
I love that one. To contextualize that for people, because that's not a thing anymore.
No, not like it
It's
was.
not. It was huge.
But like illustration was definitely something that was fighting for its identity as a like an actual art form, like a real art form, like an art. And so you had people like, Brad Holland responding to these things, because, in his time, it was definitely a big deal, especially as figuration wasn't really
Mhm.
popular in the fine art world
Right.
as it is now,
Was it because it was commercial?
Yeah. They,
Yeah.
Because I think about that with all sorts of things, like all sorts of trades back in the day that, I mean, walk into a building that was constructed 100 years ago. So many of the tradesmen so many of the tradesmen of that era, like, were artists, but were treated just like tradesmen. It's kind of an interesting,
well, that's how the galleries treated artists during the uh, mid-century.
yeah.
And
Whereas like now, if you hire somebody to do like molding, like if they did it the way they did 100 years ago, you'd be like, I hired a true craftsman.
Right.
You'd be like an artiste, right?
Well,
there was a group of illustrators that broke that mold. Uh,
Sure.
my
Interesting.
dad's response to, he said, when he first started trying to become a painter and
Yeah.
trying to get a New York gallery, he said he realized the only thing worse than being an illustrator to try to get a New York gallery at the time was being a really well-known illustrator.
Yeah.
I love the Marshall Arisman. I think it was like I'm paraphrasing it, but the quote about how he was in a gallery, and the gallery owner said that when he asked like, "What do you do?" He's like, "Well, I'm an illustrator." The gallery owner would be like, it'd be a lot better if you were a plumber. That's something we
Yeah,
could do.
you'd have a better
Yeah.
shot.
Uh,
That was, yeah.
Funny.
But that mold got broken and the galleries are very open to it now. Um,
well, I
and
think
this
thanks
is
thanks in
coming,
part to these people right
That's
here.
right.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've had so many times where I was talking to someone, about our favorite artist or our period of art history, and then they found out I was an illustrator, and then they just like paid their tab and left.
What?
Oh,
Yeah, like literally said something like, oh, okay, so you're not actually a painter, you just do what other people tell you to do. And then they left.
yeah, there's been
It was a weird time for a while.
there's a transition there, but you saw guys like the ones that really have success at first were the group of illustrators that became Western painters. And there's a lot of New York galleries that would look at that and say, well, that's not art either. Um, um, Very opinionated about things. But the Daniel Adells,
Mhm. Yeah.
the Malcolm Lipkes, the Robert Heindells, my father, a group of people that managed to make that transition to successful gallery painters really opened the door to a lot of people.
wow.
Ray, you can probably name a lot more than that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you got, I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, Arisman, you had Daniel
yeah,
Schwartz.
yeah.
You know,
Quick question on this image. Sorry. When did people start doing that? Like, because you see that now in like in film posters and books, everything. For do you guys have an idea as to when this pose
That
became?
was,
Do you think this is maybe an early variation of it?
it's funny. I got a really kick out because this is the last body of work that Brad created.
Oh, okay.
And it's
oh,
for,
really?
it was for,
I was asking that because I thought maybe if he'd done it like in the 70s, like 70s, 80s,
well,
like,
it's for a Shakespeare series. And I got a
mhm.
real kick out of it. If you go look at the Shakespeare series my father did, he did the
Right.
same pose
I
like
was good. I was gonna
30,
say like you're.
35 years
That's
ago.
what it just brought me right back to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
people been doing it
It
forever.
could,
It's like the go-to for like a Nicole Kidman drama.
yeah.
Like,
Okay. So,
yeah.
this is a shot of those three guys. The guy on the left is Gary Kelly. Guy in the middle is my father, Mark English, and then Brad Holland on the right. This was the last year at the Illustration Academy. The last year we did it in 2019, and that's like Mount Rushmore of illustrators from
Yeah.
1965 to 2010.
Yeah. You know what's
2000.
crazy? That recorder is there. That means we have a recording of this. I'm gonna find it and I'll post
Yeah.
it to YouTube.
Yeah, it's
Whoa.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Nice.
it's
You have it.
amazing that my dad's career. So, I mean, he kind of took off in 1964, 1965, and worked as an illustrator till about 1990, before he started just painting all the time. And then, Brad exploded in there, and then Gary Kelly is probably the only one that put the pressure on Brad, with success, for a period of about 10 or 15 years. And then the this is the funny part. Between the three of them, there's over 90 medals at the Society of Illustrators between those three people. That just
Wow.
blows my mind.
About 3 minutes after this photo was taken, I told Gary and Brad they were gonna be sleeping in a dorm that night. Took it like champs. Brad was like this, he's used to New York, so
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God, you did this for me?
It's a very lively, great shot of Brad.